Okay, good evening. I'm Liz Smith. I'm the event director with Expona, and I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's webinar, Get Real. I'm particularly excited about this topic because it's a little more niche, fun, and we chose it because it was crowdsourced. So this is what you guys wanted, so this is what we're bringing you tonight. A big thank you to Audio-Technica for sponsoring tonight's webinar. Driven by a passion for listening and grounded in the belief that high quality audio should be accessible for all, Audio-Technica has designed countless critically acclaimed headphones, turntables, microphones, and phono cartridges over its 59-year history. Learn more about Audio-Technica and its full range of products at audiotechnica.com. And with that, I just have a few housekeeping notes. Our talk is going to last about an hour. We're going to start with some planned questions from the that we prepared, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. So if you have a question, feel free to type it into the question feature, and we're going to cover as many as we can. So now for our panel, in our virtual room, we have our moderator, Nan Pincus, with part-time audiophile, and our panel members are Miles Astor with Positive Feedback and AudioNirvana.org, Chris Mara with Mara Machines, Paul Stubblebine with The Tape Project, and Maria with Zavalinka Records. And so now let's get started. Nan, you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone who is joining us. And I'm really excited to learn a ton from these panelists with you. So starting off, I want to first, when you answer the first question, if you don't mind telling us a little bit about who you are. And the first question I want to ask is, what's the reel-to-reel difference? And what is it that's keeping you invested in the medium every day? And who would like to go first?
I'll start.
Miles.
Okay, so I'm a writer, as Liz introduced, for Positive Feedback, and I started my own bulletin board, AudioNirvana.org, for high-end audio and music. And I've been writing about reel-to-reel now for probably almost close to 15 years for Positive Feedback, back when everybody said, you're insane, this is never going to be a real thing. Why are you doing this? You heard every naysayer under the sun talking about how you can't do it. And I kind of kept plugging away. And, I was kind of introduced to, always had an interest in reel-to-reel. But, back in the 80s, I had friends that had tape. But, with the tapes that were sort of commercially available back then, my turntable was better, and it kind of continued that way until one CES in the late Winston Mons. Some of you may know him or don't know him. He was really into music and equipment, had a great audio system, dragged me by the hand one day and said, hey, Miles, you got to hear this. And he dragged me into his room, and lo and behold, there was a tape machine. And what were they playing? I think it might have been Paul's first tape, but it was Arnold Overtures by reference recording. And I was listening to it, and I said, holy crap. This is like something I've never heard. I got to look into this some more. And one thing led to another. And here we are 15 years later, and I'm still writing about it. And now we have all these people out there like Paul and Maria and Chris and everybody building machines and putting out tape. So that's kind of my introduction to tape. Why am I interested in it? Well, I'm an audiophile, and audiophiles want to get the closest they can back to the original event. So there's nothing better than getting, one generation away from the master tape. Why do you like it? Well, from a technical perspective, we could argue that, well, tape sounds the same from the beginning to the end. It doesn't change its frequency response and sound from the outer to the inner part of the record. You don't have to monitor the bass. You don't have to necessarily constrict the dynamic. So there's a lot of technical advantage to it. But I will just add this as a point that nowadays turntables have gotten incredibly good. So people are getting a lot more finicky about the tapes that they're buying because the turntables and the records have gotten so good that the differences keep getting smaller and smaller. But then you kind of improve one, and then all of a sudden, then you go back, you improve your turntable, then you improve the reel-to-reel. So you keep getting still these differences. And what's all it's showing is that we still have a long ways to go to extract the sound from tape and from records.
Wonderful, thank you. Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Stubblebine, a longtime mastering engineer, and for an even longer period of time, an audiophile. And about 15 years ago, with a couple of partners, I started the Tape Project, a reel-to-reel tape label. because we wanted to put out some of the world's greatest music on what we thought was the world's best sounding audio format. I'm still in it because it's still satisfying to me. I love music. I listen to it all the time. I listen to whatever music I want to listen to on the best format I can get. So not everything's on tape, but typically at the end of the evening, we'll get the tape spinning and it's like the fine cognac at the end of the evening. It's just so delicious, so nourishing. Miles has already mentioned some of the technical sides, but I am more taken by the poetic sides of it. I find that music on tape draws me in more easily than on any other format. And there's a wholeness to the sound that you don't even know you're missing until you hear tape, because none of the rest of our formats can quite match that. And believe me, I've worked in all the formats from when I started mastering in 1973. The way we made records was record them on analog tape and then put them on LP. And I've followed all the formats, release formats since then. And we can talk about their strong points. They all have strong points. I'm not going to say that tape is the only format that sounds good, or even that it's a perfect format, because it's not. But to me, it's just ultimately satisfying when I get a chance to relax in the living room and get the music on the speakers, turn the lights down a little, turn the volume up a little bit. I love it. That's why I'm still doing it.
Excellent. And Maria has another voice in tape.
Hi guys, nice to see you all here today. Yeah, my name is Marie and I represent Zavalinka Records. We started 4 years ago, and we first came to Munich with our first tape, Esta Pizzola, which actually would have been 100 years today. And well, I got to it through my dad, who's been doing it for a long time. And yeah, I love it because I love music, first of all. And I used to play the piano for a long time. And my granddad was a composer, and my grandmother is a music teacher. So I've been always into music, and that's the most important thing for me. And I think it sounds great on tape. That's the best answer, I would say. And I love the shows. I love to see people getting hooked by that. And yeah, we travel a lot, and we show our tapes, and yeah, I really enjoy it. And I think that so far it has been the best format. And I remember that the first time I listened to our very first tape, and I was a little skeptical, I just thought, well, will I be able to listen to the whole thing? Because it's something new, and it's always not easy, right? And I just remember that when it stopped, I just thought, wow, I've listened to the whole thing. And yeah, since then, I love it.
And moving from the tape to the machine, Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Mara. I come to tape machines from a recording standpoint. I'm a recording engineer and own one of the larger studios in Nashville. And through that, I was drawn to tape machines through recording. It's a much more, the workflow with artists is a lot more pure to me, and challenging and involving. And through that, I started restoring tape machines for the recording studio market and mixing and mastering engineers. And people like Miles kind of pulled me into the hi-fi market. And what keeps me coming back to it every day is the challenge of learning new things, because education is a big part of my life, whether it be recording techniques or tape machines. I would say 90% of MAR machine owners have never owned or used a tape machine before. So it challenges me to learn things in different ways, to explain to people. And my favorite thing is when I see someone on Zoom who has a MAR machine in there, and it takes them 5 or 6 minutes to put tape on there, and they're apologetic. And then like a month or two later, I see them on Zoom again, and they're talking to me as they thread tape. And it's just the coolest thing, you know. So I'm not even kidding. I learn something every day, whether I want to or not. Sometimes I'm not in the mood to learn something new, but they're so mechanical and they're so nuanced. It's really fun. So
Wonderful. And this next question, the positions that y'all are coming from might influence it slightly. So feel free to adjust the question, like Miles, adjust the question slightly. So what are the qualities of a recording that make it a really attractive fit for a tape restoration and duplication project?
Maybe Paul should start on this one.
Well, I did 15 years ago, and I have the same philosophy that I did then. We look for music that has the ability to enchant and delight the listener, and has proven that ability over years, that has stood the test of time. Some of the things we do, we also pay a lot of attention to the sound quality, and some things we do even if the sound quality is not that great. We've done several releases which are not audiophile spectaculars, but in every case, it was music worth putting out. And people have heard this music for years, and they've never heard it as well produced as when they hear a taped version of it. So that's what I'm looking for, really, is music that gets inside you.
Okay, I'll follow up. I think there are many factors that enter into whether something's being released on, tape or not. And I think Paul's touched on the one, the musical quality, musical performance, sound. I think in some cases, some labels have chosen what they're going to release based on what records have sold the most. I think that's another thing. That has to deal with older recordings. And then, of course, you have people like Maria and Chris that are doing new recordings. So that's a whole nother thing. A lot of times now people are doing recordings in parallel still, where they take Yarlung records, where they're doing it in high res digital and in tape. So, they have both formats to release it in. And obviously they have kind of like their philosophy is kind of like getting away from classical war horses, doing some jazz. So, that's sort of their label. You have like Jonathan Horowitz, from International Phonograph in Chicago. It's all pretty much new jazz plus stuff that he did years ago, which is, his is historical. I mean, it happens to be pretty good sound, but it might be going back to the 70s, 80s, and stuff that he did with Mark Levinson tape deck and mics and stuff like that. And he'll have like stuff of Chick Corea. So you're seeing, hearing a lot of history. So, it's all over the place. Why do you choose it? But, I think that probably the biggest factor in the end comes down to money. Okay. We'd all like to have rock titles, that would probably be the thing that would really tape on, definitely out for everybody to see. But, a lot of the rock titles are just prohibitively expensive to license. I mean, licensing is probably what, Paul, half the cost of doing the stuff now?
It's a big chunk of the cost, and it's also just tricky to do. Much weirder than I ever thought when I started doing it.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the biggest issue is really, getting the licensing to, we're just going to stay with legit tapes, that hopefully we know the provenance of, which is a whole nother bag of worms to talk about, So I don't want to take up all the time, but I think that's the biggest thing really comes down to, like the cost and being able to make it profitable or at least break even on releasing a tape, which is not, it's really easy to lose money. Amazon proved that in the beginning, like in trying to get market share. It's like, well, we're just going to undersell everybody and lose money. Well, unfortunately, we can't afford to do that with tape.
Right.
I will add to this, if I may, jump back in, that we developed a huge wish list of titles we'd like to put out. And then we go through and we'll first of all make sure it was recorded on analog and that the first generation analog master exists. Then we start working on getting the rights to do it, the licensing part of it. So there's many titles that we would like to be putting out that we aren't for one reason, that they failed one or those two or three tests. And as a result of the way we do things, most of our titles are a little older. I'm really pleased to see people recording fresh recordings on analog tape and putting them out. And I love to see the whole availability broaden. I have very broad taste in music myself, and I'm not really interested in a narrow niche of any kind. So Maria and everyone else that's doing original recordings today, more power to you.
I think that was as a great segue into your experiences, Maria.
Well, it's well, there is no marketplace with, or like a supermarket with tapes, right? You can go and choose easily, right? It's not easy, but that's also the greatest part, maybe. Yeah. So that's there are always stories behind it, and well, for us, everything is important, of course, the sound quality and the recording itself. For me personally, it's always music, because I love music, and even if as Paul mentioned, even if it's not perfect from the audio point of view, right? It's not the most important thing for me, right? Music is always what I go for. But we have different recordings, right? We have live recordings, for example, the first one, Pastor Pistola, and many others. And we have also studio recordings. And we also have, we're working with a low swing studio from Berlin now. And yeah, we have now 29 titles, and the last one is about to come. And right, so it's I think that, yeah, it's not easy, and everything is important, but music is for me is always the number one, is always the priority, because I don't really like it. I get a bit upset sometimes when I go to those shows and I see people listening to music, and they say, well, the sound is not very good, but the music is great, right? So, and they always are I think that's the problem sometimes, that people are so much concentrated on the sound that they don't hear the music. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's what I find a little upsetting, and I want to show that music is more important, definitely.
I guess I'll take up the rear. I have no experience on releasing titles, but I'll speak to what I like to hear on analog tape the best, which is a female vocal. If I walk into a session and there's a really good female vocalist, I immediately suggest recording on tape. It's amazing. So.
It's like any type of vocal, or jazz or opera, what kind of vocal too, or any?
I mean, female, I tend to record Americana and rock stuff. But there's something about everything that I don't like about a female vocal in the digital world gets smoothed out, and it really engages me on tape. So.
I was just going to follow up on one last thing about it, which it's something that pertains just to releasing vintage recordings, going back 50s, 60s, whether it be tape or LP, which is like, record labels are really loath to send master tapes to any Joe Schmo. They're very loath to even just send them out of the studios anymore. So getting the master tape, as Paul's intimated, is even harder than most people realize. And that's why I would like when Paul, and especially someone like Chad, came into the market, because Chad has, probably as much contacts within the music industry as anybody, in terms of being able to release stuff. So, that's what's kind of really important, is having those contacts and an engineer they trust. Like Sony's not going to send to anybody. They'll send it to Ryan Smith. You got people like Paul, you got Bernie Grunman, those are the people, and Ryan, those are the people they trust. They're not going to send it to just any recording engineer nowadays.
And Paul, you touched on the poetic elements, and then I find in the female vocal answer with Chris, I think you're also touching on a little bit of this, like, it's not intangible, but this sort of more like narrative, qualitative aspect that tape can bring to the fore. So for my next question, I'm curious about going even farther into the narrative and the stories. So how has a restoration process or a recording process ever revealed a history or a story you wouldn't have known otherwise?
Yeah, one of my favorite accidental careers is because I've got a recording studio and MAR machine in the same building. We do a lot of tape archives, and so we'll do multi-track tapes from the sessions, which are my favorite because you hear the banter in between, right? I've gotten to hear Paul McCartney talk to Linda in the booth together between takes, that no one else has heard since it was recorded. But my favorite was I did a multi-track transfer, and on the track sheet, bass and tambourine were recorded on the same track, which I thought was really odd. And I looked at the track sheet, and Bob Olson was a recording engineer. I know Bob, so the next time I saw him, I said, "Hey, Bob, I was transferring some stuff you recorded at Motown, and bass and tambourine were on the same track. Why?" And he laughed. He said, "Well, the console we had was an 8-track console, and the one thing you change in the mix the most is the tambourine. So I would record it on the bass track, and we had an EQ, like a high frequency EQ knob. So I had a tambourine fader." And that's a fun story because most people's workflow and tricks came from necessity, and that's one of them. So he was thinking about the mix aspects while he recorded it, which is kind of fun.
Maria, you're smiling. What do you what story is in your mind?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm smiling because I'm happy to be here. I smile a lot generally, so yeah. Yeah, we have a story actually. There were 2 machines brought by Sony to Russia before the Olympics in the 80s, and actually 2 of our tapes, Brats, you might have heard of that, it's balalaikas. They were recorded on that machine, but before that, Svetoslav Richter was recorded on that. So I think it's very cool. And I think it's like, there's so many stories like this, it's always about people as in context, as Miles mentioned. And you get to know more people, you get to know those musicians I could never imagine meeting. For example, we have a wide collection of rock music, and when I was a child, and my parents used to listen to them when they were young, and they were my idols, and then we just have their recordings now. That is very cool. And I'm sure you have those stories as well, because I think that's the best about it.
I didn't expect Svetoslav Richter to come up in this conversation, but I think that is like that one excites me because I hadn't even thought about that. But when we're talking about a recording artist whose body of work is like, there's a lot of bad recordings, right? And like everyone is kind of and like far few recordings were done because he didn't want to do it. And then we go into Miles' point with like provenance and ethics, because I think a lot of them were done when he didn't know they were being done. And so, yeah, now I'm just excited about here.
And it's cool that we're sharing it now, right? It's just, it's amazing that we get to know those details. And it sounds a little weird, right? Like machine, Richter and all those things, but I think it's great sharing those things and telling to other people later at the shows. That's the best.
I'm going to say, for me, I guess it's been a little bit about the history, meeting people. I think, back in '86, I covered David Chesky reissuing a lot of the Living Stereo tapes at RCA. And I got to see all the master tapes at RCA, and each box, they'd have cards and everything about all the different pressings and notes and that. And to me, seeing that history was pretty amazing. On the other hand, the thing that was really sad was like when RCA moved from downtown up to that time when they were on 46th Street, they decided that they didn't need them anymore. and they had destroyed all of Louis Layton's recording notes, which to me was like, I can't believe they just like threw all the recording notes for all these great recordings were thrown out in the move. And to me, that made,
Heartbreaking.
I wanted to cry, you know. And I said, I've had other people call me up to help them with certain things. And, you know, one person called me up to reissue a project which never happened, which would have been near and dear to my heart, which was of the great Czech pianist Ivan Moravec, recorded on Connoisseur Society. And, you know, Connoisseur Society was one of those labels back in the 60s that was super audiophile, using the Ampex, and everything was custom designed like Robert Fine and Mercury did. And person called me up and loved the recording. And it's like, can you help me find Alan Silver? And because I knew like they had been reissued on digital and this and that, and he might be around. And, you know, I must have spent like 3 months doing online, all types of searches. And I don't know if he's alive or not. I don't know what happened to the tapes. I couldn't find out any information. And that, to me, that was kind of a real sad dead end to things, you know, but that was kind of like trying to look back into history. And, you know, these were great recordings that a lot of people didn't even know about, of people like Manitas Toplata, Ivan Moravec, you know, and they were in their infancy. No one knew who these people were. They were just being introduced to the world in the late 50s and early 60s, you know. Cool stuff. Oh, and Ali Akbar Khan, if you liked Indian music, I mean, his stuff was fabulous.
Paul?
Oh, I'm thinking of lots of stories which I probably shouldn't tell because they're embarrassing to somebody. So this doesn't have much to do with anything, but I'll just tell it because it's only embarrassing to me. So I'm allowed to say it. I was doing a record in the studio with Doug Somm, and we were really moving fast. We were burning through this record. The band was just really tight, and we would get several good takes every day. And one day after they're all gone, and I'm leadering up the takes and everything, go home for the night. When I come in the morning, I realized that I had trimmed the intro off of one of the songs on the 2-inch multi-track. So I had to spend a couple of hours finding all the scraps out of the trash, literally, trying to find out the one that was the right piece, wipe off the cigarette ashes and the beer and everything, and splice it back on, which I finally managed to do just before the producer showed up, so we could share a laugh about it. And we still share a laugh about it whenever we get together. Many of the other stories are not only embarrassing, but tragic. You know, Miles, you mentioned a couple of things that are just lost. I've had far too many of those. One of the dirty little secrets of our industry is that the companies that own the rights to many of these things don't really take good enough care of them. And it's not just the notes, as you were talking about. In many cases, it's the art. When they're doing reissues now, they're normally scanning an LP jacket that they got off of eBay because they threw out huge amounts of flat files of gorgeous art and stuff. And of course, a lot of the master tapes themselves. If they weren't recognizable to the accountants that were running it, the label at the time, they just said, we don't want to spend the money to store these any longer, get rid of them. And off to the dumpster they went. So I don't know what we can do about it. I work with some professional organizations that are trying to hold the industry's feet to the fire all the time about taking better care of the masters.
And this is like kind of a hypothetical question that I've seen emerge a little bit in the chat and some of the pre-submitted questions. And it's just, if the master isn't viable, would it ever make sense to make tape off of like a high quality LP that was like released on record? And I think I know the answer, but I think I've seen that question a few times, and I'm not sure. I think my answer could be wrong. So I think we'd all probably could learn something from an answer.
Well, to my knowledge, I mean, I can think of a couple of examples, not on tape, but on LP, where there was a Lightning Hopkins that Chad reissued, and I think it was recorded in 68. By 72, the master tape had disappeared. So anything after the original record release was cut from some multi-generational removed from the master thing. And by the time they got that other copy, it wasn't in good shape. So he actually digitized the best quality record. And I think even there, another example was Jayton. A lot of people don't know this label from Germany that did direct-to-disc. And they're some of the best sound you're going to find on direct-to-disc records. And they reissued stuff. And I can't figure out whether they didn't do a tape backup. Like normally you'd always do, if you were doing it back in the early days, you'd be running 2 tape machines in parallel in case something happened to one. You'd have the backup taped as, you know, a backup. And a lot of times in the early days, like with the direct-to-disc, they would do the direct-to-disc at the same time, like Sheffield would. They'd also be running a tape at the same time. But it doesn't seem like Jayton did a tape, because all their stuff, then they went back to the original direct-to-disc, made a tape copy of the direct-to-disc, and then used that to make the reissue of their LP.
If you have nothing else, of course, you use the best that you can come up with, hopefully with full disclosure. And if it is the best you've got, you should use it. We've never done that for the tape project. I doubt we ever will. We did use a tape copy in one case. This is already well known, so I don't mind telling this story. This was the Linda Ronstadt album we did. And after we had signed the license deal and paid the advance, they started giving us tapes, which were obviously poor quality copies. And I spent a better part of a year researching what had happened. And the short version of the story is that the master itself has been missing since 1975. The record was made in 1974, and the original master went missing after it had been signed back into the Capitol vaults. And with luck, actually, it was Steve Hoffman who told me about a flat copy that had been made, and which would be the preferred copy if you had to use one. So I got that from Capitol and used it, and that's the source for our tape. The only time we have not been able to get a original master. You know, one of the big enthusiasts for tape is Greg Barone there in outside of Washington, D.C. And he loves transferring LPs to tape and has entire listening parties at every show playing primarily that. People seem to like the parties and like what they're experiencing there.
And Jeff
So,
Jacobs at J Quarter does that too. He's done like LP to tape stuff.
Yeah.
And I also have kind of a question about the story you were telling, Paul, where they basically were giving like this poor quality version. When it's that kind of like, in my mind, it's like akin to like detecting an art forgery. Is it based off of, is it more sound or more visual? Because I would think there might be a visual component too when you're gauging.
Both. The first tape that they sent me, it was obvious to me that it was a tape copy because it said so right on it, that it had been made for the LP cutting. Sometimes if cutting the LP was going to be tricky, they would make a tape copy with all the changes in it to make cutting the LP a lot easier, especially after the first round. That particular one, of course, was initially mastered by Bernie Grunman. He was still working at A&M at the time. And this is Heart Like a Wheel, if anyone doesn't know. And after he signed off and said, we're finished, sent the tape back to the Capitol vaults, well, they'd have reissues or the need for recuts. And instead of sending the master back to Bernie, they would work from this EQ'd copy. Well, that was just the first one they gave me. The second one, it wasn't so obvious from the box, the labeling, but when I pulled out the tape, there were no splices in it, no leaders. And I knew that this was put together from mixes that happened over a period of weeks, and they would take the chosen takes, splice them together with leader between them. So the master would have looked very different from the tape that they gave me. It also was pretty obvious by listening in this case.
Right. That's pretty fascinating. And looking at the chat, I do want us to pivot into some of the kind of practical questions for those interested in going deeper and experiencing this for themselves. So I guess I'm gonna do like a half and half question. One would be where we're hearing, basically like accessibility and cost. So how would someone get their feet wet? And kind of relatedly, what does entry level or first steps look like when we're talking about reel to reel?
I can answer this, and I've been trying to keep up with the chat too. And I'll just kind of, Burton Rosenberg had a question about, he said, hey Chris, humble audiophiles are on a budget and can't afford professional machines, which is why I'd like to see TIAC and other manufacturers make affordable machines. Well, this is the same conversation, in my opinion, as what titles should you release, right? If TIAC or someone else is to manufacture a machine, they'd have to know they could sell so many to mass produce them to be affordable again. And that's why my company focuses on restoring machines, and we do them for less than I believe TIAC could make a new one at a reasonable scale, right? Because the market is smaller than it was when analog was not a choice. It was the format, right? So accessibility is a loaded question with me, right? Because yes, you can buy something on eBay, but you're not sure what you have. And we have, Mar Machines has a couple different options for 1/4 inch 2 tracks, which is what, professional format, which is what Paul and others that I respect release on. And I think you could easily spend more money on a turntable than you could on a machine from us. So.
And how, like, let's say the market did expand rapidly based off these machines from 70s, 80s, etc., and farther back. Like how, like, let's say this panel went really well and the market doubled overnight. Is there enough machines to restore that it could be working on the restoration level, or would that prompt, new manufacturing?
I think there's plenty of machines out there, my personal opinion. Plenty. If the market doubled, people would spend more time looking around in their garage and put those machines up for sale. But I endorse Chris's point. Just buying a machine that you know nothing about is not a very good starting point. These machines should be professionally restored. Chris does the MCI machines, a good professional deck, and yes, you wind up spending, maybe half what you spend on a turntable, and you get better sound. I will also say, I think that the format itself is so good that you can appreciate it even if you're starting with a modest machine and hopefully working up later. I would say that a decent running Revox B77 is a common thing. There's millions of them in the field. And when I say common, I hear people ask me about it all the time. Will my tape play on this machine? And my answer is yes, it will. And it will not sound as good as on a restored MCI from Chris Mara or a restored ATR 100 from ATR Service. But hey, you keep the tape, and when you get a better machine, it'll sound better, just like when you upgrade your turntable or your cartridge.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that you need guidance on. I wrote an article 13, 15 years ago with Paul's assistance and Dan Schmalley's assistance from the Tape Project on, searching out your first tape machine. So if people ever want to Google search, Miles Astor and Tape Project positive feedback, that you might be able to find a good start. But, I think there are a lot of things that factor into it. I think first is, there's the turnkey approach, like Chris's, where you just you have everything, you plug it in, you hit, you rewind it, you hit play, and that's it. You don't have to worry about anything. Greg Barron, United Home Audio, you have a couple new machines out there from Costas Metaxas, which is based on the old Stellavox. You've got the Ballfinger. They're not cheap dates. They're pretty expensive machines. And you always wonder in the long run about parts for them. That's another consideration when you deal with a lot of the older machines. Studers, you're not going to have any problem. Ampex, you're not. But there are other more exotic machines, that will have problems. Then you can kind of divide it into prosumer machine and pro machines. So the prosumer, you might say like Techniques, Otari, those are machines that everybody knows about. That could be a good starting, base for getting into tape. And then you can easily do like I've done, which you could replace the heads, you could replace the electronics. But the basic thing is you've got a good tape drive. That's what you really want, is that drive system. Or you can go to a pro machine like Studer's, Ampex, like Chris's machines, they're all in one. But, the thing is that generally when you deal with them, and it's not hard, you could take courses, Chris office classes, ATR office classes. You need to know a little bit more about operating the pro machines. Whereas, like the Techniques, there's not all that much that you need to be able to do with it. And then lastly, you could also you want high speed, you want to make sure it can do 15 IPS. You want to make sure it can do, at least IEC and NAB EQ curves, be able to play the modern tapes. And you'd like to have someone like Paul and Chris said, someone, and there are a lot of tape techs out there that are really good. You want them to be able to set it up, make sure the heads are aligned. Then you might want to learn how to do that yourself. With the Studer machines, if you buy a Studer, you could pretty much take it to the bank. You're going to need to get the caps replaced in it before you can play it, because they have 20, 30 years old. They dry out. You're going to need to replace the cap. So, if you buy one of the pro machines, you're probably going to have to invest some money into it, as opposed to Chris's machine, which is already all tricked out. I know one option is he already has it set up. So if you want to use outboard electronics like a Doshi, there's some other outboard electronics, all you got to do is, set it up. So, those are kind of the options. But, the last might be space. Your Techniques, your Otari machine, they're vertical. You'd like to run them horizontal, but you could run them for vertical. The Studer 810, you could run vertical. Not a whole lot of space. When you start to get into like an 880, an 820, then you start talking about running them horizontally. They're bigger machines. They take up more room in your listening room. So that's just, for me in a New York apartment, that kind of made it hard to, think about that type of machine.
And related to that space element, but also like what is kind of the like down the line effect of adding reel-to-reel as a source? Do you find when you're watching somebody like who's encountering it and getting into it and now has the machine and is buying tapes, do they then change other components of their system because a source has changed and so what they're valuing from, let's say, their speakers is changing? Or is that not really, and it doesn't tend to affect other aspects of the system?
Okay, so let me relate back to my journey at RCA. I was hearing master tapes at RCA played through some crappy JBL speakers, and it made the JBL speakers sound like $1 million. So, what I find is people come over here, they hear tape, and 9 out of 10 people go out and buy a tape machine. And I have 9 out of 10 people go, oh, all I want is a simple machine. And then 9 out of 10 go crazy once they hear it, and they got to upgrade it. They want to put new heads. They want to get outboard electronics. Once you hear what it can do, what the promise is, then people really want to hear everything that's on the tape.
Great answer. And so it sounds like the follow-up steps are, for many, going to be upgrading the machine itself and components as opposed to the other aspects of the system.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking.
Well, there's a great resource Paul knows, Chris knows, like, if you want to get your heads changed on the Techniques or any of the other machines, a lot of people go to Flux magnetic heads. There's John French. I think John's in New Jersey, and John's really good. Everybody goes to him. He changes the heads. So, pretty much then you just need somebody to line it. So there's a lot of infrastructure. Once you get into the, there's a whole, clique of people into tape, and you get to know the people. And people are, the one thing that's really nice about tape is just the community. The community of people in it is so nice. Everybody I've met has been helpful. If I have a question, I know who I can turn to, because we don't all know it all. There's a lot of people like Paul that's been around forever, and Chris, and you know, there's so much stuff they have to share.
Yeah.
And
Well, I could, yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was just,
Chris and Maria.
okay. Just real quickly, we were talking about sales and stuff earlier, you know, and I was thinking, you know, our tape machine sales have been steadily increasing every year, 20, 30, 40%. And that's allowed us to reinvest in the restoration process. So this year is going to be a big year for us. We're going to announce a lot of things that we've been able to do to our machines that will affect the price, but the client, the end user is going to get a lot more from these machines from us. So that's a, you know, tip of the hat to everyone that's been supporting the format for sure, you know. So keep an eye on what we're doing.
And Maria?
No, I was going to say that I actually checked out the prices, and I would like to buy one Studer for my apartment in Italy, and it was like 2,000, 3,000 euros, and Reeboks, I think you can even get it for 500 euros. So it's not expensive. You know, if you really want to do that, it's possible. And I have a friend in Italy who bought Telefunken for 150 euros only. Well, he spent a lot on restoration, and I know people who got it for free. So it's, you know, you start with passion, and it's just a never-ending process. So I guess it's yeah, it is expensive. It can be very expensive, like Metaxas and Sins, and what else? Nagra, of course, they also offer new machines, and Bullfinger is very expensive, right? But there are possibilities, I think. So it's possible.
And so then once you are getting into the recordings, going to Miles' point about the community, how is the process of finding music you want to listen to when, let's say, you're most of the time listening to like a high-res streaming platform, which is, right, like most things you want to hear easily available, versus, you know, I don't think you would go into buying a tape with, well, these are the 5 tapes and I'm just going to assume I can buy them, right? It'd be like the opposite of that. So how do people find the music they want to listen to within the tape community?
I think there's a pretty good list that Miles maintains on his website, audionirvana.org. Is it .org?
Yes.
So I would start there.
Great.
I mean, as you know, getting back to that, you know, I think, you know, tapes are never going to replace, you know, being able to have a music server and the quantity of music that you can listen to. It's not going to replace most people who are into analog, your record collection. It's a supplement too, you know. I kind of always set it up like, you know, I wanted to be able to have maybe 100 to 200 titles on tape. And you figure, okay, I, you know, get the titles I want, and how many hours a week do you listen to, etc. You know, you're going to go for a pretty long time without repeating your tapes, you know. And it's just great. I got to say, you know, from the, you know, what's the words I'm searching for? You know, guilty pleasure. You know, it's nice to have friends come over and like, you know, you got to hear this tape, you know. And you know, I have like converted people from digital to listen to the tape, and you know, 30 seconds into the tape, you know, they go, digital's never ever going to do what it's never going to do this, you know. And they went out and bought a tape machine, you know. So I mean, it's just, to me, it's just, I just get a lot of pleasure. It's like, it just brings me so much more, like Paul said, into the music. I just hear more of what's going on. It could be silly things, like I'm listening to something and I'm hearing like little weird things and how they're doing the fade, or, you know, you're just hearing how they're doing the reverb on someone's voice, you know. It's just, but it's like in the room with you, you know. That's the difference. It's like really so involving. Like there's all these barriers broken down, because I think it's all about information, and it just seems to have more information than the other sources I listen to. And the more information, the more the brain's able to recreate that original event again.
Well put. And the like, I'm trying to combine a few different ones from the chat. So I actually, yeah, this will be fun. you're going to send somebody just got their first machine, one recording, what is it? And I took some liberties. That's not in the chat, but there was a couple ideas from it.
Man, that's a tough one. There's, I mean, you know, first of all, you got classical, rock, and jazz. So, you know, to choose.
Those are the only genres.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think from classical, I'd have to say, you know, just from sheer sound, you know, the Arnold Overtures done by Keith Johnson is a hard recording to beat, you know. You know, in terms of rock, that's a little harder one because that's a genre that's not super well represented, you know. I don't know. That's a little harder one. I mean, and it, like jazz, there's so many good ones. Like, you know, wherever you want to start. I mean, you know what? Again, I kind of go back to one of Paul's titles, the Bill Evans Waltz for Debbie. I mean, to me, that's sort of the quintessential live recording. I mean, great musicians, and you're sitting there and you're listening and you're going, okay, they started this song before the audience arrived. They're playing this song, the audience is there, you know, because it just like that whole atmosphere of the club is so wildly captured. I mean, you hear glasses clinking. It's like a time machine. I mean, seriously, it's like a time machine. Unfortunately, I think that's out of print, so you can't recommend that one, right,
Oh,
Paul?
no, it's on the shelves right now.
Oh, is it? Okay.
From our catalog, I would, if a person likes jazz at all, I would send them the Jimmy Smith, the Sermon. Not everyone likes organ jazz, but this has some playing by Lee Morgan that's better than on records where he was the leader. It's got Kenny Burrell all over it. It's just an incredible recording. I would even offer to send it to you, and if you don't like it, I'll buy it back. If I had enough. Right now, I'm a little low on those, but
Really
that one I would.
Of course, that is like not a release. I would have, you know, it was the last thing I would have guessed. So, indeed, not every yes, the people. It seems like organ jazz gets very little appreciation. So, and Chris,
you know, I heard, like, I think it was Expona in Denver one year. I think the first year I brought a machine, and Chad brought that Janice Ian. Help me out, Miles.
Breaking Silence.
Yes, thank you. And Chad brought a bigger reel, and this kind of answers a lot of questions that are in the chat about how do you set up a machine and to match tapes, right? So I brought my machine. Chad brought his tape. He brought a bigger reel. I couldn't rewind far enough to calibrate the machine to the tones. So I just played it and I listened and I adjusted a little bit to ear. And Sony had brought their speakers and no pressure. And they said it sounded awesome. And I sat and listened to that thing, that Genesee Breaking Silence, for 3 days. And I heard something different in it each time. It blew me away. It was a well-recorded, I think Bill Schnee did it.
Stripped down.
But powerful in the again, female vocal, the reverbs, it's deep. You know, I had the mountains in the background looking out the window, but get that one. It sold me. I listen to tape machines every day and I was like, this is really good. You know, and again, I just guessed on the calibration based on these things. So
I don't want to take this a different direction, but you mentioned Bill Schnee. I just have to tell you, his autobiography just got released last week, maybe. It's great. I recommend it to anybody that is interested in pop music, pop and rock music from the 70s on. It's just one story after the next. Fabulous. Yeah. Called a Chairman at the Board.
Yeah, he's no joke.
Yeah.
And Maria, what are so like your friend who just got a machine, like what do you want to gift first, tape wise?
Oh, well, it depends. Classical music, I would definitely go for something from our Melodia collection. So I guess for me it would be Symphonic Dances by Rachmaninoff, which both perfect sonically and musically amazing. And well, maybe pop music, rock music would be Bratz, Electric Balalaikas. It's something you've never heard before. And I don't know. And rock music, Russian rock music. If you come from Russia, then you definitely have to get one from maybe Margulis, I guess. So there are many, and it's difficult to choose, especially when you're talking about our catalog. When you talk about your own catalog, it's difficult to choose one. But yeah, there are many always.
And I'll say this too, Paul. The music I listen to on our machines changes because we restore machines and we record on them. And this last month, I've been doing the final test on our machines with Lady Gaga's single "Stupid Love." And Paul, there's something in the chorus. There's a note that they hit that is exactly where the low end bump on our machines is. It just like comes alive. So check it out. Just download it off Spotify and print it on your machine. You'll love it. It's nuts. And the vocal is so bright, you can tell if your image is wrong because it'll move. It's good.
What's the name of the tune?
Stupid Love.
All right.
Yeah, Miles, you've got to introduce the other panelist.
Oh, this is one of our 3 kittens. This is Emmy. She's a 9-month-old ragdoll. She's what they call a seal point tortie mitted, although it takes them about 3 years for them to get their adult coat. So she's look is still changing, but she's got a sister. She and her sister we got, and we also have a 6-month-old boy Bengal around here. He's sleeping in his hammock, but Emmy is the one who always wants attention and usually is with me when I'm listening.
Now, I guess there's some discussion going on in the chat kind of around like almost this idea of like sensitivity of tape, like which makes me think of the cats, because it's like basically like, do I need to be so much more careful, right, around who's around it, what's in the air, the temperature, etc. So let's say you're kind of a klutzy audiophile who's not so much a method or process man or woman. Is tape not for you?
Can I jump in on that one? I run across a lot of people putting down many formats by suggesting that anything that possibly can go wrong has gone wrong with every single one of them. And I've seen this for tape, and certainly I've seen people slam LPs because of all the processing that they imply is done to every single LP, which some of these processes are actually quite rare. Tape is not that fragile. You want to keep it away from high humidity and wide swings of temperature. So in other words, keeping it in your house, putting it in a closet, things like that.
Well, what about like reel-to-reel camping that you had to do?
I'm building a tape machine to take camping because I love camping, but I don't want to be away from my tapes. So I'm going to put together a system for recording really good quality 7.5 quarter tracks on 10-inch reels, so I can get a couple hours on each reel, and Nagra 4 transport to play it back. So anyway, I have always things to keep me busy.
Yeah, and I'll jump in too. Tape is this really interesting thing where if you put high frequency to it and you sit there and watch the meters, you will see some movement. But in my opinion, music is much more transient, much more I don't know, and help me out, Paul. It's much more resilient, right? Yes. Technically there may be flaws in the tape, but a powerful mix is not going to be susceptible to that. Okay. And then let's say you do store your tapes in non-ideal conditions, or your AC goes out and they get ruined. Well, you can put them in a dehumidifier and you get them back.
Yeah.
And I don't have anything I can put my LPs in to unscratch them or my CDs to unscratch them. Well, there is. It's Amazon. I buy another one. But you know, that's a big part of my life is restoring old tapes and all that. And I'm constantly amazed at how resilient the format is. You know.
Can I also add one other thing about, you asked about tape machines, which is tape machines are like potato chips. You can't eat just one. And there's so many people I know in tape now, they have like 2, 3, 4, 5 machines. They might pick up a small machine that they can, you know, bring around, like a small Niagara, so they could bring to their friends, so their friends could hear tape in their system. So there's like, you know, another little thing that people do. Someone might just pick up a G36 Revox just to play their 4-track tapes on, you know. So there's like a whole other thing going on too, rather than even just thinking about, you know, I know most people just have one turntable and 3 or 4 arms, but you know, there are a lot of people that have 3 or 4 tape decks. And then some people like do their own dubs. They like making their own dubs of tapes. So, you know.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that doubling in interest that I'm hoping would happen might happen, because this is making it seem like the klutzy humidity filled houses of
So the question is, have we convinced you, Nan, to buy a tape deck?
Okay, well, wonderful. There's I think we've covered most of the questions that recur, and we are past time. So I want to thank everybody, and Liz can thank people better than I can.
Yeah, I was gonna say thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you to our panel. I mean, I appreciate you guys taking your time to chat with us and share your knowledge. Thank you again to Audio Technica for sponsoring. For everyone watching, if you need to watch this again, I'm going to post it on the Expona YouTube channel. So if you need to look back for notes, and we'll be doing more of these next month. So everyone have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz, for organizing.
Thank
Thanks, Nan.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
Nice
everyone.
seeing you.
Bye.
Talking to you.
Good seeing
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thanks
Maria,
for
nice meeting
attending.
you. Miles, Paul, good seeing you again.
Yeah, get real.